Did you know that during the peak of Barney's popularity, they had announced a spin-off? But not just any spin-off, an edgy, action-packed show for boys. Something closer to the Ninja Turtles or Pokémon, maybe even Power Rangers. And it was going to be fully 2D animated with a cool redesign. And then it vanished. No pilot, no episodes, no nothing. So what happened? Why did it die? And how do you even make an edgy action show out of a preschool brand? Well, let's get into it. This is the story of the cancelled animated action Barney spinoff. Welcome to the Barney Desk. So first, the obvious question is, why would the Barney team even try this? Well, we gotta get into a little bit of context as to who they are. The Lions Group, later known as Lyric Studios, was kind of this weird anomaly in kids' entertainment. They were an independent studio in Texas that somehow found themselves controlling one of the most valuable IPs on Earth. At its peak, Barney and Friends was effectively printing money through toy licensing, home videos, and publishing. But by 1997, the Barney bubble was clearly starting to deflate. Not because Barney was suddenly irrelevant, but because the explosive growth phase was over. The market was saturated. Every kid who wanted a Barney plush already had one. What had once been rapid expansion turned into a slower replacement cycle. At the same time, the culture was turning on him. The truly dumbfounding movement of Barney bashing was seeping into playgrounds and accelerating a sort of stigma. Older kids wouldn't be caught dead admitting that they liked Barney. And that's what led to Lyric's most serious problem, what I'd like to call a brutal churn crisis. Back in 1993, kids stuck with Barney until around age 6, but by 1998, the societal peer pressure from their classmates was aging them out closer to 4. Lyric could hook them at 2 and then lose them 2 years later. They needed a bridge to keep kids hooked past the age of 4, and they needed it fast, because that sort of retention gap is dangerous for a company built on only one franchise. So in late 1998, Lyric pivoted. The goal was to no longer be just the Barney Company. They wanted to prove not only could they keep Barney afloat, but they could become a real children's media powerhouse in the same conversation as Nickelodeon or Disney Channel. They started grabbing distribution rights for proven hits like The Wiggles and my personal GOAT, VeggieTales. But they also wanted something far more tempting than acquisitions. Brand extension. Because when kids were growing out of Barney, it wasn't like they hated every part of the show equally. There was one character, especially with boys, who still had a little bit of coolness left in the tank. BJ.
Hi, everybody! Hey, we're having drum fun now, huh?
BJ was a sneaker-wearing, drum-playing, rambunctious yellow protoceratops who was to serve as the proxy for the older sibling who'd be watching Barney with a toddler. He's also very clearly a kid-friendly take on Bart Simpson. Note the yellow and red color scheme, and them both having a distinct, exasperated catchphrase.
Ay, caramba! Ay, ay, ay!
He joked around, he played sports, he had a little bit of attitude, and he was the closest candidate they had to survive the playground stigma. So when Lyric tried to solve their churn problem, their solution wasn't to make Barney cooler. Thank God, that would have been terrible. It was to give kids a bridge show starring the one dinosaur they could still admit they kind of liked. And on November 1st, 1998, they announced the most late 90s title ever constructed. BJ and the Radical Rumblebutts. What is a rumblebutt? Sounds like it hurts. The show was partnered with Portfolio Entertainment in Toronto, Canada. Let's go! And was planned as a fully 2D animated series. It wasn't meant to feel like Barney and Friends either. Instead, more of an action-oriented show, meant to compete with the loud, extreme stuff kids were watching at the time. Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon were leading the pack, with fast-paced, stylized shows that felt edgy compared to preschool edutainment. Shows like Ninja Turtles, Batman, Power Rangers, and then there was, of course, the exploding Pokémon craze. So Lyric felt the pressure to compete in that post-Pikachu world. Portfolio Entertainment founder Lisa Olfman even said the goal was to not only give BJ a new backstory with a new show premise, but they were actually going to age him up to target 4 to 8-year-olds. They also wanted to, quote-unquote, make him hipper. And look, I can sort of see where they're coming from. BJ was designed in 1993 using 80s tropes of what being cool was. You know, red high-top sneakers and a backwards baseball cap. But by 1999, that sort of version of cool was drifting into Poochie territory. So honestly, the radical in the title kind of tells you the producers were aware of the deficit and were trying to overcompensate. So the vibe was going to be more skate punk, pop punk aesthetic, you know, less Barney and Friends and more Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Which is hilarious, don't get me wrong, that sounds very funny, but it also leads directly into the core issue here. Because here's the problem, Barney doesn't really do hip. Barney does hugs. According to an anecdote from Stephen White, the main writer of Barney and Friends, shared in the Barney History Fans Facebook group, he allegedly read a script or two for the BJ spinoff, and let's just say, he was not impressed. He said it had nothing in common with Barney or the mission of the original show. And look, that matters, because Stephen White wrote the Barney Bible, the strict rulebook on what the series could and couldn't do. So when Lyric started chasing an action-oriented BJ cartoon, they likely brought in outside Canadian animation writers and told them to make something like the Ninja Turtles, but with BJ. And the result was probably exactly what you'd imagine.
Yes, BJ has a gun. I'ma shoot you.
Okay, maybe not that. But what it actually would have been comprised of is stuff like BJ wisecracking jokes, slapstick, hip moments, the most radical drip imaginable, and maybe even a legitimately scary villain. Now, while that does sound, pretty epic to me, to Steven, that tonal shift was a betrayal of the trust parents placed in the brand. Also, apparently he wasn't even supposed to read it. The scripts were just left in plain sight near him. Absolute menace. We'd love to see it. Oh, but if you thought that was the only issue... Welcome to the Barney Desk. We do a lot of fun stuff here. You should hit subscribe because you'd be dead wrong. Because another issue is, where does this show air? Because Barney lived on PBS. That's the whole point. It's safe, non-commercial, educational, no advertisements, all those sorts of things. And there's a reason for that. PBS literally has standards that require explicit educational goals built into the characters and storylines, and they straight up flag stuff like rudeness, sarcasm, and violence as things to avoid in kids' content. So a radical, action-oriented BJ spinoff in the same lane as the Ninja Turtles would have been a pretty awkward fit for the PBS Kids brand. But honestly, that doesn't even matter because I want to tell you a little secret. They weren't even trying to pitch it to PBS. The Canadian broadcaster attached was YTV, and the US broadcaster was reportedly being negotiated. Now I know you can't see my air quotes that I'm doing right now, but if you're unaware of why I was doing the air quotes, it's because they were shopping it for cable. Channels like Cartoon Network, Fox Kids, Nickelodeon. Well, I mean, if Nick picked it up, they'd have to make some changes, of course. BJ wouldn't have been allowed to wear shoes.
You need to leave.
As awful as that would have been, unfortunately, none of these networks were taking it. You can age BJ up and redesign him all you want, but all cable executives were hearing when they heard Barney's spinoff was toddlers. So that left the show in a brutal position. It's too PBS for cable, but it's too cable for PBS. And look, animation isn't something you casually experiment with. You either have a network license fee supporting it, or you're burning real money. And then, as if there wasn't enough problems, let's throw on another one. The one that kills projects faster than any creative disagreement ever could. Money. If Cabaret taught us nothing, it's that Alan Cumming is phenomenal, but also that money does indeed make the Ved go round. Because while Lyric was out here sipping martinis on their Barney-shaped yacht acting like the next Nickelodeon, they were also spending like it. In 1999, they launched a massive 60,000 square foot expansion of their Texas headquarters with brand new sound stages. Simultaneously, they poured millions into acquiring the Wiggles, which wouldn't pay off in the US for quite a while, and were pumping out a lot of increasingly high budget Barney home videos. Now, Barney's revenue was still strong, but it had leveled off. It wasn't in that explosive growth phase anymore, and it definitely wasn't enough to bankroll multiple risky bets simultaneously. And then you want to layer a 2D animated series on top of that? Are we serious right now, chat? Late 90s animation costed $300,000 to $500,000 per episode. The average season of a cartoon had 26 episodes, so if you do a little bit of the math there, that's a $10 million season up front before a single toy hits shelves. Sure, partnering with Portfolio in Canada helped split the budget and grab tax credits, but it was still a massive gamble. You simply can't expand your headquarters, acquire new brands, upgrade your productions, and bankroll a risky animated spin-off all at the same time. Yeah, they were rich in assets, but they were poor in cash. And at some point, the cash runs out. And in February 2001, it did. Because Lyric Studios was acquired by British media giant Hit Entertainment for $275 million. Hit's strategy was simple: acquire established evergreen brands like Thomas, Bob the Builder, and of course Barney, and then maximize global licensing and merchandising. They were not the type of company to look at a risky, unproduced, tone-conflicted, broadcaster-less action cartoon spin-off and say, let's get a piece of that $10 million Rumblebutt. So the moment Hit stepped in and audited what was in development, they would have found it. The Edgy BJ action experiment, the bridge show, the brand stretch. And unfortunately, the answer was obvious. So somewhere in that late 2000 to early 2001 window, the project was quietly terminated. No! That's why this story is so frustrating, because it's not lost media in the fun way where someone finds like a 240p clip on an iPod and we all cheer and celebrate. It's lost to the archives of a billion-dollar corporation. We know scripts existed, we know pitch materials existed, but all this is corporate lost, which means it's probably sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere in Texas or Toronto. And that's what happened to the cancelled Barney spinoff. I could see why they chose BJ. It would have been a fascinating exploration of his character, but by that logic, the whole thing was doomed from the start. You can't take a franchise that's built on emotional safety and turn it into the Ninja Turtles without ripping the brand in half. But I would still pay real money to read those scripts. I need to know what a radical Rumblebutt is before I leave this earth. And honestly, I'd take 1,000,000 BJ spinoffs before I'd ever watch Barney's World. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you should consider subscribing. I do a lot of deep dives on the forgotten history of the Barney franchise and brand, so if you find this interesting, click the button below. And speaking of which, you can also join the Deskies, our little community here, where you get behind the scenes videos, early access, voting and polls, custom badges and emojis, and access to our Discord server. It's a great way to support the channel if you like what I do here. As always, I've been the Barney Desk, and thanks for watching.